The gavel struck like thunder, echoing through the chamber with a finality that demanded silence. All eyes turned to the bench, where Judge Beryl Howell sat draped in the black robe of authority, her expression carved from stone. The room seemed to shrink under the weight of her presence. Whispers faded, phones lowered. Even the air grew heavy. This was her domain. She intended to make that clear. Across the room sat Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, her posture calm, her gaze steady. To anyone watching, she looked almost serene, but beneath that quiet confidence was a mind sharpened by years of legal battles, ready to strike when provoked. Howell, however, saw none of that. What she saw was a target, someone to put in their place, someone to remind of the pecking order. Congresswoman, Howell's voice cut through the tension like a blade, clipped and cold. This is not your platform for political theater. You will answer only what is asked and nothing more. The words dripped with condescension, meant to humiliate, to shrink Jasmine into silence before the hearing even began. Gasps fluttered through the audience, not loud, but sharp enough to sting. Some smirked, enjoying the show of dominance. Others exchanged nervous glances, wondering if the rising star from Texas would falter under the judge's scorn. The imbalance was stark, robe and gavel against a woman who had climbed her way into the halls of Congress, carrying the scars of every dismissal, every underestimation. But Jasmine did not flinch. Her eyes remained locked on Howell's, unblinking, unwavering. Silence that followed was not submission, it was strategy. She allowed the judge's words to hang, to echo, to reveal their own arrogance. The chamber felt suspended in time, waiting for the crack, the stumble, the retreat. Instead, the stillness became power. Crockett's presence filled the vacuum. Howell had tried to create. For a moment, the authority of the gavel seemed strangely fragile. The judge leaned forward, convinced she had established control. But what Howell failed to recognize was that this wasn't the intimidation of a novice. This was the sharpening of steel against steel. But Judge Howell had no idea that she was about to spar with a woman who knows the law better than anyone. In the room, this wasn't just a hearing. This was a test of whether truth could survive intimidation. On paper, it was a routine proceeding, another clash of arguments within the walls of American justice. But to everyone watching, both inside the chamber and across the nation, the stakes reached far beyond the bench and the microphone. Judge Beryl Howell represented the institution. It's polished, fortified, and steeped in the authority of the establishment. Her career had been built within the high walls of the judiciary, where robes and gavels carried weight that silenced dissent. She was the embodiment of order, of power exercised from above, and of the belief that authority should never be questioned. Critics had long accused her of overreach, of wielding her position less as a guardian of fairness and more as a tool of control. Facing her was Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, but more importantly, the years that shaped her. She wasn't born into power. She forged her reputation in crowded courtrooms defending those without a voice. As a civil rights attorney who refused to back down against systems designed to overwhelm the poor and the vulnerable, when prosecutors overstepped, she pushed back. When institutions tried to bury injustices beneath technicalities, she dragged truth back into the light. Every moment of dismissal, every door slammed in her face, had only sharpened her resolve. Now the two women stood as more than individuals. They became symbols. Howell, the polished gatekeeper of elite authority, accustomed to obedience. Crockett, the daughter of struggle, carrying the fight of everyday Americans who know what it feels like to be silenced, underestimated, and told to know their place. This confrontation was no accident. It was history colliding in real time. The chambers. Atmosphere shifted with each glance exchanged. For Howell, this was about asserting dominance, about reminding everyone that even Congress members are small beneath the weight of judicial power. For Crockett, it was about more than herself. She carried the weight of communities who believed in her, the weight of those who never had a chance to stand before a judge and speak. Back with knowledge and confidence, the symbolism couldn't be ignored. The immigrant who built a life in America, the woman whose intelligence was doubted before she even opened her mouth. Crockett's presence at that table represented all of them, while Howell's gavel carried the echo of every institution that ever told them they didn't belong. This was why it mattered. This wasn't a performance. It was the lived reality of power confronting dignity. It was the establishment daring to flex its control over someone who refused to bow. And it begged a question the country has asked for centuries: who defines justice? The powerful who sit on high, or the people who demand fairness from below? The air tightened again as the hearing pressed forward. Howell's voice, cold and clipped, filled the chamber with instructions and warnings. She believed she was steering the ship. She believed that Crockett would shrink beneath the weight of protocol. But the poise in Jasmine's posture said otherwise. Her calm was not compliance. It was preparation. Every second she held steady was another second the crowd realized she wasn't intimidated. She was calculating. She was waiting. And then, as the arguments began, the cracks in Howell's authority started to show. To understand the weight of this clash, one must understand the figure seated on the bench. Judge Beryl Howell did not simply arrive at her position by chance. She climbed the polished marble staircase of the establishment one step at a time, carving a career within the insulated corridors of Washington's power structure. Born into privilege of proximity, educated in the finest institutions, she fit the mold of the establishment judge, disciplined, stern. A woman who knew the rulebook inside and out and used it to assert her authority. Over the years, Howell's reputation grew as a no-nonsense arbiter of the law. In legal circles, she was described as meticulous, iron-willed, even brilliant in her command of procedure. But beneath the praise, critics whispered another word: arrogance. They said her confidence in her judgments often crossed into condescension, that her sternness felt less like fairness and more like intimidation. For those who stood on the wrong side of her bench, the experience was less about justice and more about submission. Her courtroom style was deliberate. Every syllable carried weight. Every pause was designed to remind attorneys and witnesses alike that she was in control. She wielded silence like a weapon, forcing others to squirm, stumble, and reveal weakness. To many, this was the performance of justice. But to those who saw past the veneer, it was theater. Exercise in power masquerading as impartiality. Her rulings became infamous in certain circles. Heavy-handed sentences, sharp rebukes, public dressings down of lawyers who dared to test her patience. Applauded her as a strict enforcer of order. Others saw a different picture, a judge who relished the power imbalance between herself and those forced to stand before her bench. The contradictions piled up. Howell often spoke of fairness, of the integrity of the court, of justice applied, without fear or favor. Yet time and again, her demeanor told a different story. When confronted with voices that challenged the status quo, she shut them down. When confronted with arguments that rattled the comfortable narrative of authority, she tightened her grip. The scales of justice she claimed to uphold seemed to tilt heavily toward preserving her dominance. Her career was a series of victories. In a system designed for people like her, she did not know the sting of being silenced for who she was, the frustration of being underestimated before speaking a word. She knew only the power of being listened to, deferred to, obeyed. That power shaped her, hardened her, convinced her that her interpretation of order was synonymous with justice itself. It was this history she carried into the chamber, the day she faced Jasmine Crockett. To Howell, this was routine. She had silenced dozens before. Lawyers, politicians, activists, many had tried to push back, to challenge her authority, only to be met with the cold steel of her discipline. Her playbook was simple: strike early, establish dominance, force submission. By the end, the opponent's spirit would be broken. Their resistance collapsed beneath the weight of the robe and the gavel. But there was a problem Howell had not anticipated. The opponent before her was not a rookie lawyer trembling at her first appearance, nor a weary defendant hoping for mercy. Sitting across from her was a woman forged in the fires of legal combat, a woman who had faced hostility, not just from opposing counsel, but from a society that questioned her very right to belong. Jasmine Crockett was not unfamiliar with power being used as a weapon. Oh, she had lived it, fought it, and beaten it long before this day. Howell believed she was about to conduct another performance, another masterclass in control. She underestimated the woman across from her, dismissing Crockett as just another politician playing lawyer in her courtroom. What she failed to recognize was that Crockett was no stranger to the law. She was its fiercest defender, its relentless practitioner, its advocate in the trenches for those who could not speak for themselves. The stage was set for the same performance Howell had given countless times, the robe towering over the individual, the gavel silencing dissent. But this time, the script would not go according to plan. The audience would not witness submission. It would witness resistance, intellect, and dignity wielded like a weapon sharper than any rebuke Howell could muster. Howell had silenced dozens before, but this time, her usual playbook wouldn't work. Because across from her sat someone who wasn't just a congresswoman. She was a legal warrior, long before the bright lights of Congress, for the sharp rebukes and viral moments that would cement her reputation. Jasmine Crockett's story began in a place far removed from marble chambers and black robes. She was not born into privilege, nor raised with the expectation that doors would open simply because of her name. Her journey began on the ground level, surrounded by the daily grind of working people, who taught her resilience not through words, but through action. It was in those early years that Jasmine absorbed the lessons that would guide her life. That silence in the face of injustice is complicity, that dignity is earned by standing firm, and that the law, though often wielded as a weapon of oppression, could also be reclaimed as a shield for the vulnerable. These lessons burned in her. Long before she ever cracked open a law book, she pursued her education with a determination that startled even her peers. Where others saw barriers, she saw challenges. Where others hesitated, she advanced. The climb was steep, riddled with doubt. From those who could not imagine a young black woman standing at the forefront of the legal world. But Jasmine did not chase approval. She chased purpose. Her classrooms became battlegrounds, where she sharpened her intellect, refusing to let stereotypes dictate her ceiling. When she finally emerged as an attorney, she did not seek the comfort of corporate firms or the easy prestige of lucrative clients. Instead, she chose the harder path, civil rights law. She walked into crowded courtrooms where the faces of the marginalized looked to her with hope, where the weight of entire communities pressed on her shoulders. She defended those who could not afford high-priced counsel, those who had been discarded by systems designed to work against them. And this is where Jasmine Crockett earned her steel. She saw prosecutors lean on intimidation tactics, judges dismiss defendants with a wave of the hand, and institutions grind ordinary people into dust. But instead of shrinking, she leaned into the fire. While others ran from the fire, Jasmine walked straight into it, armed only with the truth. Her reputation grew. Colleagues whispered about her brilliance in the courtroom, her ability to recall precedent with surgical precision, her instinct to dismantle arguments brick by brick until nothing remained but the raw bones of justice. She wasn't loud for the sake of being loud. She was precise, measured, wielding words like arrows aimed at the heart of hypocrisy. But Jasmine's story was not only about the law, it was about transformation. She saw that injustice was not limited to courtrooms. It was embedded in legislation, in policy, in the very structure of governance. And so, she took her fight to the halls of Congress. Critics scoffed. They underestimated her, assuming she was a fringe voice who would be swallowed whole by the machinery of Washington. They could not have been more wrong. In Congress, Jasmine brought the same unshakable calm, the same razor-sharp intellect that had served her in court. She became a voice not just for her district, but for every person who had been told they were too small to matter. She spoke truth where others hedged. She stood firm where others bent. Colleagues began to notice. This was not just another politician. This was someone who carried the battlefield of justice with her into every debate, every hearing, every vote. Her dual identity, as both a seasoned civil rights attorney and an elected lawmaker, made her uniquely formidable. She could not be cornered by technicalities because she knew the law from the inside out. She could not be intimidated by power plays because she had stared down worse in her fight for the voiceless. She understood both the language of legal precedent and the language of people's pain. And she fused the two into a force no one could easily dismiss. This was why Jasmine Crockett represented more than herself. To many, she became a modern day David standing against the Goliaths of arrogance and oppression. She did not carry a sword or a shield, but her weapon was more devastating. The law itself, wielded with brilliance, precision, and purpose. And behind her stood the millions who had been told they didn't belong, who had been told they weren't smart enough, American enough, worthy enough. Her victories were their victories. Her battles were their battles. So when she entered the chamber that day, facing Judge Howell, Jasmine was not just another name on the docket. She was the sum of every struggle she had endured, every client she had defended, every moment she had stood her ground against impossible odds. She carried the weight of her community, the lessons of her past, and the resolve of a warrior who had nothing left to prove, but everything left to fight for. And when Judge Howell tried to corner her, Jasmine's preparation turned the tables in an instant. The first exchange struck like a spark in dry grass, threatening to ignite the chamber. Judge Howell leaned forward, eyes narrowed, voice carrying the brittle edge of authority. Congresswoman Crockett, I will remind you again, this is not an arena for your grandstanding. Answer the question directly, or I will hold you in contempt. The words rang with icy finality, daring Jasmine to push back. A hush fell over the room. Everyone had seen this performance before. Howell's voice was the blade she used to cut her opponents down. Her warnings were not suggestions, but commands. Most folded under the weight, retreating into clipped compliance. That was the expectation. Now, a stern rebuke, followed by silence. But Jasmine did not retreat. She inhaled slowly, her shoulders steady, her expression composed. When she spoke, her words came clear and deliberate, each syllable chosen with surgical care. With respect, Your Honor, I am answering the question as it was asked and as the law requires. The chamber rippled with energy. Howell's jaw tightened. That was not the script. She expected stammering, an apology, a quick retreat. Instead, she found herself facing an opponent who would not yield an inch. Howell pressed harder, her tone rising. You are not here to lecture this court. Your responsibility is to comply. If you cannot, then you will find yourself facing consequences. She punctuated the threat with a sharp rap of her gavel, sound meant to intimidate, to silence. But Jasmine's eyes never wavered. She let the echo fade before responding. Consequences do not erase the Constitution, nor do they override precedent. If the law is to mean anything, it must apply equally, even here, even now. Her calm voice carried more weight than the gavel's thunder. The audience leaned forward. Some held their breath. Others exchanged furtive glances. This was uncharted territory. Howell's authority, normally unquestioned, was being met with unshakable composure. Each attempt to tighten the grip seemed only to highlight the cracks forming in her control. Howell's arrogance swelled. She spoke faster now, cutting Jasmine off mid-sentence, piling on interruptions meant to break rhythm. It is irrelevant. We're wandering into areas this court has not granted you permission to address. Stay within bounds, or I will ensure you regret this line of argument. Still, Jasmine did not falter. She adjusted her glasses, folded her hands neatly, and delivered her response with quiet precision. Respectfully, Your Honor, my obligation is not to avoid discomfort, but to uphold the law. Boundaries cannot be redrawn simply because truth is inconvenient. The chamber erupted in murmurs. Howell's face flushed with frustration, her robe seeming less a cloak of authority and more a shield against the unraveling that had begun. The tighter she tried to control the exchange, the clearer it became that her dominance was slipping. The emotional tension built with every volley. Howell's fury contrasted sharply with Jasmine's serenity, a storm lashing against a steady stone. The audience, whether present in the room or watching from afar, felt the pressure mounting. Each word carried stakes that transcended the moment. This was not just Crockett defending herself. This was every silenced voice daring to answer back. Every underestimated fighter proving that calm courage could withstand even the sharpest intimidation. Howell's words grew clipped, frantic. Enough, Congresswoman. You're skating on the edge of contempt. Do you understand me? Jasmine held her gaze unflinching. Her voice came soft but resonant, filling the silence between them. I understand perfectly. The question is whether this court understands its duty to the law, to the people, and to the truth. Gasps filled the chamber. It was no longer Howell dictating the terms. It was Jasmine setting the stage for something greater, something neither Howell nor her gavel could contain, but Howell's confidence was about to shatter with one simple, devastating counterattack. The air grew heavy, as though the chamber itself sensed what was coming. Judge Howell, flush with irritation, leaned forward, her gavel still in hand, like a weapon she was ready to wield again. Her eyes narrowed, scanning Jasmine Crockett, as if she were a student being reprimanded before the class. The expectation was simple. Jasmine would buckle, concede, and slink back into the safety of silence. That was how these encounters always ended, but Jasmine did not move. She did not flinch. She let the silence stretch, let Howell's impatience ferment into the very arrogance that would undo her. The pause was not hesitation, it was calculation. She was letting the judge write her own downfall. When Jasmine finally spoke, her voice came measured. Low at first, but each word was laced with precision, each syllable carrying the weight of history. With respect, Your Honor, the bounds you describe are not for convenience, nor for comfort. They are defined by the Constitution. And precedent, binding precedent, has already spoken on this matter. The room froze, Howell's pen stilled against the desk. She hadn't expected citation. Not here, not now, and not delivered with such unshakable calm. Jasmine continued, her cadence rising like a crescendo. She reached back through the archive of her own memory, drawing cases as easily as a maestro plucks notes from a violin. Marbury v. Madison, the court made clear that it is the duty of the judiciary to uphold the law, not reshape it to fit its own convenience. In Brown v. Board of Education, precedent reminded us that discomfort for the powerful is not justification for silencing the pursuit of justice, and in case after case, from Gideon to Miranda, the principle is the same. The law does not bend to authority. Authority bends to the law. Gasps rippled through the chamber. Staffers leaned toward one another, whispering furiously. A few stifled. Smiles appeared, careful but undeniable, the kind of reactions that bloom when someone witnesses history bending in real time. Phones buzzed quietly as aides and journalists typed feverishly. Capturing quotes that would become headlines before the day was over, Howell's expression faltered. The mask of absolute control cracked at the edges. She tapped her gavel once, twice, but the sound no longer commanded obedience. It felt hollow, a desperate attempt to reclaim ground that was already slipping away. Jasmine pressed on, her tone unwavering. The question before us is not whether this court finds my words comfortable. The question is whether this court is prepared to ignore centuries of binding precedent simply to avoid acknowledging an inconvenient truth. She paused, letting the silence wrap around the room once more. That Your Honor would not be justice. That would be overreach. The word struck like a hammer. Overreach. It hung in the air, impossible to ignore, resonating like an accusation that pierced through the robe and into the very heart of Howell's authority. From the gallery came a low murmur, subdued but unmistakable. Someone exhaled sharply. Another whispered, "She said it." The ripple spread like a current, an audience unwilling to remain neutral as power itself was being challenged before their eyes, and then delivered the blow. She leaned slightly forward, her hands folded neatly on the table, her voice steady as stone. The role of this court is not to silence, not to intimidate, not to reshape arguments for the sake of authority. The role of this court is to uphold the law as written, as decided, as binding. That is the oath you swore. That is the duty you carry. Anything less, betrays not just the people in this chamber, but the very foundation of our democracy. Words landed with seismic force. For a heartbeat, no one breathed. The silence was absolute, a silence not of deference but of awe. It was the stillness of a room realizing it had just witnessed a turning point. The instant before applause, the split second before history solidifies into memory, Howell's gavel wavered in her hand. Her lips parted, searching for words that refused to come. The practiced authority, the iron control, the instinct to dominate. All of it faltered against the immovable wall of Jasmine Crockett's command of the law. And in that moment, Jasmine sealed the exchange. She did not raise her voice. She did not grandstand. She simply leaned back, her eyes locked on Howell, and delivered the line that would reverberate far beyond the chamber. "That's the law, Your Honor." The simplicity of the statement made it devastating. It was not just a rebuttal, it was a verdict. A reminder that robes and gavels may symbolize authority, but authority without adherence to law is nothing more than theater. The chamber stirred, alive with an energy impossible to contain. A staffer bit back a grin. A journalist mouthed the words "mic drop." Somewhere in the back, a muffled chuckle broke through the tension, quickly smothered by the gravity of the moment. Already, in the unseen world outside, the internet was igniting. Hashtags were forming, memes were being drafted, clips were being clipped. The phrase, "That's the law, Your Honor," was on its way to becoming more than a quote. It was destined to be a rallying cry. Judge Howell's facade collapsed further. Her face, once a mask of icy dominance, flushed with frustration, then disbelief. She tried to respond to reclaim the stage, but every word she mustered felt small against the echo of Jasmine's precision. The robe no longer shielded her. The gavel no longer silenced. The performance had ended and she was no longer the star. For Jasmine, there was no gloating, no flourish. Her victory was not in humiliating Howell, but in reaffirming the principle that power must answer to truth. Her calm was her weapon, her intellect, her armor, and in that chamber, they proved indestructible. The audience felt it deeply. This was more than a skirmish in a courtroom. It was a message to anyone who had ever been silenced, to anyone who had been dismissed or underestimated. Authority is not invincible. With knowledge, with courage, with dignity, it can be held accountable. And so the moment ended not with Howell's gavel, but with Jasmine Crockett's words reverberating through the walls, through the airwaves, and into the collective consciousness. "That's the law, Your Honor." And what happened after that sent shockwaves far beyond the courtroom walls. The clip hit the internet before the echo of Jasmine's words had even faded from the chamber. "That's the law, Your Honor." 6 words, delivered with calm precision, sliced through the noise of politics and power like lightning through a night sky. Within minutes, hashtags erupted across social media. Hashtag THATS the law, hashtag Crockett vs. Howell, hashtag legal genius. What had begun as a tense courtroom confrontation now thundered into the digital world, igniting screens from Washington to Wichita, from big city cafes to small-town living rooms. On Twitter, the moment spread like wildfire. Clips of Jasmine leaning forward, her steady gaze piercing through Howell's robe of authority, flooded timelines. One meme showed Howell clutching her gavel with the caption, "When intimidation fails," while another plastered Jasmine's face over a superhero comic panel, "Defender of Truth." TikTok stitched her words into remixes, with beats dropping precisely after the phrase, "That's the law, Your Honor," creating a cultural refrain that blended politics with pop culture. Commentators scrambled to keep up. Pundits on cable news replayed the exchange on loop, dissecting every pause, every syllable, every flicker of Howell's face as her authority unraveled. Some tried to downplay it, calling it a moment of courtroom theater, but their voices were drowned out by the flood of support pouring in for Jasmine Crockett. Across networks, analysts admitted the obvious: Howell had overreached, and Crockett had exposed it with surgical brilliance. Public narrative flipped in real time. Howell, once cloaked in the prestige of her robe, now appeared brittle, her heavy-handed, tactics laid bare. Jasmine, underestimated at first, emerged as a people's champion. A figure who had stared down the gavel of intimidation and answered not with fear, but with truth. The ripple effect stretched far beyond Washington. Celebrities weighed in. A-list actors posted the clip with captions like, "This is how you speak truth to power." Musicians quoted her line and lyrics, teasing future songs that would immortalize the moment. Activists called it a blueprint for resistance. replaying her composure as proof that knowledge and dignity can disarm arrogance. Politicians, too, felt the tremors. Allies rallied behind Jasmine, praising her brilliance and calling her the embodiment of the next generation of leadership. Opponents scrambled to recalibrate, some dismissing the moment as viral fluff, others awkwardly trying to twist it into evidence of partisanship. But it was too late. The story belonged to the people. The people had already chosen their hero. For ordinary citizens, the victory was personal. In barbershops and diners, on buses and subways, conversations echoed the same sentiment. Jasmine Crockett didn't just win an argument, she won for all of us. She stood tall where others would have been cut down. She showed that calm courage could face down the establishment and prevail. It wasn't just Crockett who won that day, one woman wrote in a viral Facebook post. It was everyone who ever felt small against the powerful. The emotional resonance could not be overstated. Parents showed the clip to their children. As proof that standing up for what's right matters, teachers used it as a lesson in civics and courage. Immigrants and workers, long accustomed to being ignored or dismissed, shared it with captions like, "This is our voice, it's our fight." The victory belonged not only to Jasmine, but to the millions who saw themselves reflected in her resolve. And then came the unexpected. Endorsements from unlikely places. Legal scholars praised the precision of her argument, marveling at how flawlessly she threaded precedent into the moment. Commentators who normally avoided praise for progressive leaders admitted they were impressed. Even comedians joined in, turning the phrase into punchlines that only spread the message further. The moment became larger than politics. It became a cultural flashpoint. The courtroom exchange between Crockett and Howell transformed into a story of justice versus arrogance, dignity versus intimidation, the underdog versus the elite. It became, in the words of one viral tweet, proof that the robe and gavel don't always win. Judge Howell, for all her years of control, found herself recast in the public eye. No longer the untouchable arbiter of justice, she was framed as the symbol of overreach, of power wielded carelessly. The contrast was devastating. And as the days turned into weeks, her name became less about rulings and more about the day she underestimated Jasmine Crockett. But Jasmine's name rose higher. She became not just a congresswoman or a lawyer, but a symbol, a reminder that dignity can dismantle arrogance, that knowledge can puncture intimidation, that calm truth can silence even the loudest gavel. The shockwaves were undeniable. Not a moment that would fade quietly. It was a spark that ignited conversations about justice, fairness, and the resilience of those who had always been told to sit down and stay silent. But Jasmine's victory wasn't just viral. It carried a lesson that America desperately needed to hear. In the days after the confrontation, Jasmine Crockett spoke not of victory, but of principle. She did not revel in the viral fame, nor did she boast about silencing a judge. Instead, she lifted the moment out of the courtroom and into the heart of America. This was never about me, she said. This was about whether dignity and truth can survive when intimidation tries to drown them out. Her words carried the same calm conviction as her courtroom takedown, reminding the nation that justice is not measured in gavels or robes. It is measured in the courage to stand firm. That was the deeper truth. Dignity and truth are stronger than intimidation. The confrontation with Judge Howell wasn't just a clash of personalities. It was a clash of values. On one side, the arrogance of unchecked power. On the other, the quiet resilience of someone who had walked through fire before and knew how to stand her ground. The resonance of that exchange came not from its drama, but from its symbolism. It was a reminder that every American, no matter their background, has the right to speak truth. Even when power tries to silence them, this was more than law, it was legacy. America was built on the idea that no one is above accountability, not even those who wear the robe or wield the gavel. The nation's greatest heroes, from the civil rights marchers who faced down police dogs to the whistleblowers who exposed corruption, have always been those who refused to bow to intimidation. Jasmine's stand was a continuation of that lineage, a modern echo of the courage that shaped the country's soul. and it struck a nerve, because Americans are tired of being told to stay quiet. They are tired of watching arrogance win, while ordinary people pay the price. Jasmine's words, "That's the law, Your Honor," became more than a courtroom rebuke. They became a rallying cry, a reminder that knowledge can be power, that dignity can be armor, and that truth, when spoken with courage, cannot be silenced. Her story reflected the best of American values. Equality, because she insisted that the law applied equally, even to the powerful. Justice, because she held firm to principles that could not be bent for convenience. Resilience, because she did not falter, even when threatened. Her own struggles mirrored back at them. The immigrant told to stay quiet. The worker told to accept unfairness. The citizen told that power always wins. The emotional crescendo was undeniable. This wasn't just law. This was legacy. It was the legacy of standing tall when others try to cut you down, of meeting arrogance with courage, of turning silence into strength. It was the reminder that while power may shout, dignity endures, and in that endurance lies the real force of change. For viewers, the lesson was as empowering as it was inspiring. You don't need a gavel to command respect. You don't need a title to demand justice. All you need is the courage to speak truth, even when it trembles on your lips. Crockett's composure showed that real strength is not in how loudly you speak, but in how firmly you stand. Arrogance crumbles when met with courage, and courage multiplies when it is witnessed by others. That is why the story mattered. Because one Congresswoman out-argued a judge, but because it proved that the fight for dignity is alive. It reminded the nation that the battle between arrogance and truth is not confined to courtrooms or chambers. It unfolds every day, in every town, in every life. And that's why this story cannot end here, because the fight for dignity belongs to all of us. Judge Howell tried to punish her, but Jasmine Crockett's legal genius turned the tables. What was meant to be a moment of intimidation became a masterclass in truth, composure, and courage. And that's why people across the country can't stop talking about it, because they saw more than a courtroom exchange. They saw the power of dignity triumphing over arrogance. This story is a reminder of what justice really means. It isn't about robes, titles, or gavels. It's about the unshakable courage to stand firm when others try to silence you. Jasmine showed that real authority doesn't come from intimidation. It comes from truth, spoken calmly, clearly, and without fear. And that truth belongs to all of us. Every time someone refuses to bow to arrogance, every time a worker, a student, or an immigrant insists on being treated with dignity, that same spirit lives on. Jasmine Crockett didn't just defend herself in that courtroom. She carried the voice of everyone who's ever been told they don't matter. She proved them wrong. So if you believe in that fight, don't let this moment fade. Share this story. Subscribe to this channel so you don't miss the next chapter in the struggle for justice and dignity. Join a community that refuses to be silent, that insists on standing tall, that believes in voices like Jasmine's. Because when voices like Jasmine's rise, no gavel in the world can silence them.